And this next session is going to dive into how we can further inclusion and diversity in our industry and the broader FinTech industry. It's actually interesting because research shows that more diverse companies are more innovative and typically more profitable. So why is it still so difficult to find diversity in tech? Stellar Development Foundation CEO Danelle Dixon has an awesome panel lined up to talk about this exact subject and the path forward towards greater diversity. What's worked so far and what still needs to be done. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Danelle.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I have the great pleasure of speaking with some super talented leaders in our space and also just in tech generally. And it's about a topic that's so near and dear to my heart, and that I just feel like we have come so far, but have so much further to go. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. This is still a challenge in tech generally, and in FinTech in particular. And it's not rocket science that diversity and inclusion are two of the most important things that we need to be able to bring into the fold. So what I want to do is I'm going to allow the panel to introduce each of them to introduce themselves. We have Lin Hua Wu. We also have Dr. Anino Amua. And then I also have Clev, and I want to get her name said right, Mesidor, right, Clev? I'm hopeful, I think I got that right. But I want to have each of you introduce yourselves. And what I wanted to do was actually, when you make the introduction, if you could just also tell us about what the last conversation that you had about diversity and inclusion, other than being on a panel, was, and why you actually had it. So Lynn, let's start with you.
Hi, Danelle. Thanks so much. It's really an honor to be on this panel with all of these wonderful women today. I am the Chief Communications Officer of Dropbox. I also have the pleasure and honor of serving on the board of SDF. And before Dropbox, so at Dropbox, I run internal and external communications, our brand marketing, and our analyst relations functions. And before that, I was at Square. And a long time ago, I started out as a lawyer. So I've had a couple of diverse hats. And the last conversation I actually had about diversity was yesterday evening, right before bedtime, with my twin 9-year-old girls, who said they talked about in sports class what it meant to have a boys sports and a girls sports, and why the teacher, to her credit, said that there weren't such things as girls and boys sports, that they were both equal, and that that boys and girls should be able to take part in dodgeball just as much as, that everyone should be able to. So it was last night.
Wow, that's a great one. Those are the kinds that I have those conversations. We have 5 boys in our house, and we have them all the time. And I love that we get to do that. So Anino, it's so nice to have you here, to be back on a discussion with you. And I'd love to hear your introduction and also your story.
Hi, Danelle, and thank you very much for having me here. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. And well, my name is Anino Amua. I am the founder and managing director of Avondis Consulting in France. It's a strategy and financial advisory firm. But in addition to that, I also run communities of women in business leadership. And I also run, or at least I started off a network in Nigeria to do with women in FinTech. That's the Nigerian branch of an African FinTech network. In addition to that, I think that I sit on several boards, and one of the conversations that really stood in my mind talking about diversity was when I was interviewing on a panel last week or 2 weeks ago, a founder. Now, this founder is originally from Africa, now living in America for many years. Her name is Mary Spayo. Now, Mary is a founder in virtual reality, and she started out her career as a deep space engineer. And through her career, she found that she was able to create a digital platform. She innovated a digital platform which would allow creatives to distribute all their work across the world. Now, the point about this was I had asked her what marked her as a woman in tech. And she said to me, well, it wasn't so much a woman in tech. I don't think it was anything to do with gender. She said, what I brought to this was my knowledge and my diversity of my experience I'd lived in Africa and I knew that, African creatives could not distribute music and film and all of that in the way in which it was being distributed. It was far too expensive. And now her innovation has created this digital standard around the world globally. So I think the point is that diversity is good, but talent, there is no gender a talent has no gender. And I think that that's really what struck me.
That is so awesome and so true. It's one of the things, if we continuously bring in diverse backgrounds in terms of what people's experiences are and focus on regional experiences, it actually brightens everything and makes it so that we can understand differences across the globe. So thank you for that. And Clev, you have done so much for blockchain just in terms of bringing these issues to blockchain. Why don't you give us your introduction and then also your story?
Well, thank you for leading this conversation and allowing me to participate. I lead the National Policy Network of Women of Color in Blockchain. Last year, we actually brought about a delegation of 25 women to Congress to meet with members to show that women of color are building in this space. I also run a startup, Logos, but previously, I actually worked in politics. I was a presidential appointee for the Obama administration, where I worked at the Department of Commerce, leading public affairs for one of the agencies. So it's been a thrill to marry my political background, my economic background, with the work I'm doing within crypto. And certainly, diversity and inclusion is an important topic for me. I recently published a book that focuses on my time in politics and my time in crypto. And the focus is really on equity and inclusion. So it's interesting. I recently had a conversation with a few friends and we were talking about the fact that it's the 21st century and it's the dawn of the fourth industrial revolution. We are still commemorating first, right? We have the first female vice president. We even have the first Black astronaut that's going to have extended stay on the space station. But it's interesting that these things are really happening, right? What exactly is the achievement we're celebrating? And it was interesting because I thought that for some people, right, they're proud to see themselves reflected. Somebody who looked like them was finally getting the recognition that so many did not get, so many were passed over for, so many were denied. But there are some in this world, in this country, when they see it first, they're celebrating the fact that they actually think this is the first time somebody qualified from that group is being recognized. So two different perspectives, but it goes back to the point that there are so many barriers that impede talented people from succeeding, and that's why diversity and inclusion initiatives are so important, because if we're going to create an inclusive economy, we're going to have to make sure we're having these tough conversations, because diversity and inclusion is not easy at all.
Well, thank you for each of you for those introductions. I knew that I couldn't do them justice, and I'm grateful that each of you agreed to do that for yourself. So let's just jump into the topic. Clev, could you give us the definition of diversity and inclusion? How should we think about that from this standpoint?
Yes. So everyone defines diversity and inclusion differently, right? So for the purpose of this conversation, I know we'll probably be talking about the workplace, the marketplace, and the workforce. But for me, diversity is about our humanity. It's about the interwoven tapestry of our similarities and our differences. Inclusion actually focuses on the culture, right? The environment that actually creates a space for people to feel that they belong. Diversity includes race, age, religion, gender, socioeconomic status. There's also the differently abled, Native and Indigenous groups, as well as the LGBTQ non-binary community. Demographics also plays a role. We know that about 45% of this country, of the US, are people of color. But if you drill down a little further, actually last year, for the first time, more than half of the US population of people under 16 years old identified themselves as persons of color. And of that group, 40% of them were Black and Latinx youth. So when you look at, the opportunity for inclusion, the innovation economy we're creating, the next generation of leaders, they're very inclusive, which makes the case for making sure that Black and brown people are included, but that we expand our definition and we make sure that we're being inclusive and looking beyond just race, gender, age, socioeconomic status, and religion.
I do think that you're right that the next generation has gotten this a lot better than I think that we did. And I think maybe we've helped pave the way a bit, but I love the hope that brings. Anino, the tech sector clearly has had challenges with respect to diversity and inclusion, and FinTech is no different. I know you and I have spoken before about a lot of the issues that we've seen in FinTech. And are we getting better? Are we moving in the right direction? Are the numbers actually improving? How does that look to you?
The numbers are improving, yes, but like everything else, it's a little bit too slow. And I think that if we try and look at some of the causes and some of the issues surrounding FinTech, similar to what's happening in the tech sector and similar to what's happening in the finance sector. But in the FinTech sector, it's actually even worse. So for example, when we look at the top leadership, we look at boards and only 14% of boards are women. If we compare that to the banking sector right now, which is about 23%. But you look at the workforce in FinTech and it's about 30% women. But at senior roles, it goes down to 17%. And of course, FinTech is new, is about innovation. The sector really started to grow after the crisis in 2008 and 2009. So it's all about innovation. And when we look at innovation, in terms of founders, only 5% of founders are women. And one thing that we know clearly is that when people react to seeing people like us. And so when it is perceived that it's not an industry that is for women, especially at leadership is always key and is always important. And that is one obstacle. So, and then we get to a situation, I'm sorry, which is not very pleasant, but it then looks as if you have FinTech products that are products made by men for men. And so even on the user side, are those products actually products made for women as well? I'll give an example, and we don't have enough data in terms of the usage of certain products by gender. But for example, when you look at financial management apps and look at how much they're downloaded, they're mainly downloaded by men. Why shouldn't women be downloading financial management apps as well? So these are some of the issues, and I'm sure we'll talk about the solutions a little bit later.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the issues. I actually, I was so gratified. I was recently hiring or finalizing the process for a VP of engineering hire. And one of the candidates who I really, really liked, she actually said that she only interviewed with us because we had a female CEO. And that to me was like that's exactly what we want. But at the same time, we shouldn't have to have so few female CEOs out there in blockchain and FinTech. So Lynn, I look at the world and I look at all of these issues that are out there. So grateful that you are in a leadership position with us on our board, and so provide us so much wonderful guidance. And I wondered, and this is prompted by a conversation that we've had before. Does COVID and the remote working environment that we've moved to, is that helpful in creating more diversity and opportunity with and inclusive ideas with respect to technology and FinTech in particular?
I think it could. And so the jury is still out a bit, right? Because we're all in this and still in the middle of it. And it's unprecedented. So I don't think we have the data yet to show it. But if there is a silver lining, and it's obviously a horrible pandemic that we're in, that's a terrible thing for humanity to have to live through. But when I think about what we're doing at my current position at Dropbox, we are thinking a little bit differently. It's opened up our mind in terms of remote and distributed work. We have, hubs where we have most of our employees around the globe and around this country. And we've announced a new model where we're allowing people to have more flexibility in terms of where they work. where they move to, and thinking about other hubs. And so my view is, if people do this right and put thought into it, the remote work environment should be beneficial in terms of diversity and inclusion. Because, for example, if you want to retain employees as they go through their life's journey, right? Some people think the Bay Area, for example, is very expensive, because it is. And this might not be sustainable. So you end up losing people who maybe didn't come from such wealthy backgrounds originally, right? I grew up in a very small town in Minnesota. And I remember as a child thinking, my father was a professor at the University of Minnesota. And I remember thinking about diversity as the farmers' kids, and the kids who were from single parent homes, and the kids who didn't really have any money. And that is like the socioeconomic kind of diversity. But I also knew those kids were really, really smart. And as we aged through the high school system, the separation became greater and greater, right? Those kids were out like harvesting and doing those things. And so I think if we're moving hubs away from some of the larger metropolitan areas and thinking a little bit more openly about schools we can recruit from and where people can live, there are areas of the country that are going to be more friendly, for example, or more welcoming, or African Americans, Black people will feel a sense of belonging, because we know in San Francisco there's a small population. So I do think it can be a boon for retention and for just opening up people's minds about a bigger pool of recruiting.
Yeah, I think that it's one of those, when we always have to think about where we can open up the floodgates a bit, and to create that, what you said, and like having people look more like you and in these roles. And I think that coming from various different geographies definitely helps. Clev, why? This is a question that I know it might be simple in our minds, but why is it so important that we have diversity in crypto and fintech? You have to unmute. I'm so sorry.
So sorry. Yeah. Well, the problem is difficult, right? It's deep rooted, and it's systematic. So in order for us to, when we look at, fintech and the marketplace, we've spent probably the last decade or so creating a pipeline, talented, skilled, diverse innovators, and we have to make sure that there's opportunity for them in fintech, in crypto, in tech in general. And also, we mentioned, product design bias. That's a real concern. But also financial inclusion. We know that globally, 1.7 billion people are either unbanked, underbanked, or lack access to basic financial services. In the US, that's about 55 million. We have to do more. COVID, as was mentioned, exposed this fault line, right? During a lockdown, how do you get stimulus checks to people in need? So we identified, this fault line, and crypto is definitely, in my space, is definitely, has an opportunity to help close the financial inclusion gap. But I will say there's a blind spot, right? So in crypto, we've created the wallets, we've created the digital assets, but the blind spot is financial literacy. For most communities of color or marginalized communities, they're not just going to just get a crypto wallet. So I'm actually working on a project that would leverage the existing financial literacy centers all across the country to actually create a cold storage course that would actually be completed at these centers. And when people graduate from them, they would get their first cold storage wallet. We want people to have access to as many options as we can to actually close this financial inclusion gap. But we have to make sure people are educated, people have the tools, but we have the infrastructure in place. These financial literacy centers are explaining to people the difference between buying something with cash, check, or credit card. Let's add digital money to that mix as well.
That's such a great idea. And it's absolutely one of the things that it's really hard to educate out of context. And I think if you can educate in context from any user standpoint, then it actually opens up the marketplace for everyone. Anino, so we talk about like your story at the beginning is something to me that I constantly try to hammer home to my team, because I think about can we actually sit in our bubble in the Bay Area or in New York and actually build these tools when we're focused on financial inclusion? Can we build them for folks that we actually don't get to see and talk to every day and understand their experiences in these regions? So if we're really trying to work towards building organizations and networks that represent the interests of all of our customers, how do we do that, Anino? Like, how do we make sure that we're bringing everyone into the fold and that we're actually not building a product by men for women?
That is absolutely an excellent question, and thank you very much for that. If we look at a lot of the innovation that has happened, in the tech space, so we look at, the Facebooks and the Googles and all of that. These were innovations made by people who experienced a particular need. Look at Facebook, for example. So they were innovations that were made by people, and they had said, we can see this need. Now, for financial inclusion, for example, financial inclusion is not people like us, okay? It's people out there. It's the 1.7 billion people that Clev mentioned, and they're not like us. And that means, and by the way, the 1.7 billion people, 2/3 of them have mobile phones. So they are accessible. And mobile phones and mobile payments were responsible for getting getting rid of most of financial exclusion in East Africa, in Kenya. So when we talk about a business case, we're already saying that we have the platforms to reach these people. Now, so if they're not people like you or people like us, where are they? You have to do what the researchers do. You need research, ethnographic research. You need to go out there. I'll give you a little case we had in Nigeria. A firm I'm working with, they're doing amazing innovative stuff in financial inclusion and all of that on biometrics, etc. And we're talking through the product and everything. And I said, so have you seen the users yet? And go out to the markets, go and sit in the store for a week and sit among the people. So you need ethnographic research and be amongst these people. Okay, so if you're a man, you can't be a woman, right? So get the women on your team, for goodness sake, So you need to be out there. You need to do the research. You need to understand the barriers. There's some barriers that are impossible to understand without being there. A brief example, when we look at, for example, women in markets. And one of the barriers is that they're in markets, they probably have childcare, young children. They can't afford to go to the access points. So the banking service has to come to them, for example. So that is it. You need to be out there, do the research, and be amongst the people who need the services. So I think I'll leave it at that.
I think that is so important. And I also think that, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, so many people jump to the gender issue, and it's just not about gender. And so I feel like this is, part of it is, of course, because we want to be able to have everybody represented, but it's just about regional differences. It's about socioeconomic differences. It's about gender. It's about race. It's about so many different pieces of it. So Lynn, when we're focused on what steps that we need to take in order to see returns on investment in diversity and inclusion, what would you say that the most important 2 steps that we need to take are?
I think number one, there needs to be a deliberate decision among leadership of any organization or company that this is something that's important, that it is important for the business, right? Until then, it can't be lip service. It really needs to be, this is important for the business and for our competitive advantage for the future. So there needs to be alignment on that. I think the second part is there needs to be then the necessary resources put against this. And I don't mean throwing a bunch of money necessarily at certain programs or projects, but there really does need to be some thought and commitment put into this, right? So whether it's an OKR or an annual goal you have to increase diversity, but it really needs to be thoughtful and I think all encompassing, right? It is how you show up to the world, your organization. Are you highlighting a diverse, panel? Are you highlighting in your messaging? Are you being inclusive in the way you talk? Who are the leaders that you're highlighting and how are you going about recruiting? Where are you recruiting from? So I think it's a decision that is actually based from leadership out of the business needs and then commitment to that in some kind of a plan. So that's what I would say the 2 most important things are. And without that, it is really just lip service.
Yeah, no, I agree. We have a question from the audience from Lisa, and she says, is there a board of advisors available to entrepreneurs who want to help getting started to meet our shared goal for diversity and job creation? I actually don't know the answer to that. So does anyone? If there's not one, we should create it.
Yes.
I think that there's a
Good
lot of
idea.
information out there. I think that, but I don't think that there's a board of advisors. So I think that that is something that, you know, if we could actually create something around, if something could be created around putting all of this information together, I think that would be really useful. So we have just a few more minutes, but I would love to end with each of you. And I'm going to start with Lynn first. And I want to know, Lynn, how important is it that we get this right? Like what is at stake here?
Well, as we've heard from our panelists, right, the future is diverse, and it's not going to get less diverse, right? When we're talking about gender and age and race, I mean, all of this, the customers at whatever your organization is, whatever you're doing, right, whether it's product or services, you need to stay competitive and build for the future. So this is a problem that whoever cracks this nut and really creates a sense of belonging, it's not only a more rigorous process to create that service and product, but it's actually a competitive advantage. So I think it's critically important.
Clev, same question to you.
Yes, it's so vital. Again, we're creating this innovation economy. The world is younger. They have more technology at their disposal, but we still have old problems that we're trying to solve. You know, regardless of the organization, you know, from the top of leadership, there needs to be a buy-in investment that this is important, because as we just said, the return on investment is there. We need more diverse people, voices, and also products as we create. So, you know, the stakes are so high right now. And going back to the person who asked the question, I do think there are so many resources out there and a lot of case studies for when it didn't work, right? When there was investment in diversity and inclusion and the return wasn't there. We can learn a lot from it, but this is hard work and we have to keep at it. It's important, it's valuable, and it's critical to where we actually take the economy next.
And Nino, same question to you.
Well, we live in a world of innovation, and we also live in a world of big, complex challenges. And this is a knowledge generation. And it's so important because, you know, those challenges and those solutions that we need can only happen when we have all the talent available to us. So that's the first thing. We need all the talent available to us, really. The second thing is, you know, a lot of what we're trying to do in the financial sector is trying to undo, you know, what has been there for hundreds of years. It's hard work. We don't want, you know, generations to try and undo all the work, you know, all the bad work. Now, so that means right now we're the beginning of an industry in the FinTech, in emerging technologies. Now's the time to do it so that in 200, in 500 years time, you know, we shan't be talking about this anymore. So build it right from day one, I think is the point.
I am so grateful that there are leaders like each of you out there that are focused on this issue, but also just focused on getting tech right and getting it right for everyone who's a participant. So thank you. This could go on forever because I could just sit here and talk to you guys over coffee and have fun with that, but it can't. We have to close. So thank you for your time and attention always on this and every other topic that you each lead on. And so grateful that you spent this time with us at Meridian. Thank you.